Hello there and welcome back to the Net Report. Chris here, and we are now currently 2 weeks into the NFL season, and some surprising teams have really struggled out the gate, starting off 0-2 to begin the NFL season. We all know the success rate for teams making the playoffs after an 0-2 start is historically low, sitting at just 11.5% since 1990. So today, I am here to take a deep dive at 5 of these teams and discuss whether or not they will be able to bounce back after a rough start, or if it is a sign of a long and rough season going forward. Side note, this list is in no particular order, so without further ado, let's get into the list. First, we have the Los Angeles Chargers, who are one of the more surprising teams starting off the season 0-2. They lost in week 1 to the Dolphins in an absolute shootout, and then lost the following week to the Titans, both one-score games that were certainly very winnable. And this Chargers team is way too talented to be 0-2. As many people would put it, the Chargers keep on charging away winnable games. Many people have been pointing to the coaching of Staley as the main culprit, as well as the play calling. In week 1, it was the lack of defensive adjustments that received a lot of the criticism, especially not doubling Tyreek Hill, who went off for 215 receiving yards, and letting Tua overall carve up that defense. And in week 2, it came down to bad late game execution, electing not to use your first timeout until 3rd and 3 at the 7-yard line with 21 seconds left in the fourth, playing for overtime, and then going 3 and out on 3 straight incompletions and allowing the Titans to march down the field and kick the game-winning field goal. Chargers fans are rightfully upset after the historic collapse against the Jaguars last year. This team is still finding ways to lose close games they should be winning. Whether they can bounce back or not depends on a lot of factors. They were of course without Austin Eckler, who has an ankle injury, and if that continues to be a nagging injury throughout the season, that can be a huge loss for the Chargers. Even if he does play and he is not 100% week to week, that can still be big going forward. Eric Kendricks also had a hamstring injury which may linger throughout the season, so if the Chargers continue to have injuries mount up like this and the late game execution in close games does not get better, this can end up being a rough year for the Chargers, especially trying to make the playoffs in a loaded AFC. The season is still young, so I would not immediately panic, especially with a talent like Justin Herbert under center, but if they do not turn this around quickly, Brandon Staley may be on the hot seat and could end up getting fired. The biggest step for this team is for the offense to overcome its late game woes, especially with an offense as loaded as they are. If they are not able to turn it around quickly, this could be a long season for Chargers fans. Moving on to the next 0-2 team, I have the Minnesota Vikings, who started off with a disappointing loss to the Buccaneers in week 1, and then lost the Thursday night matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles. And going into the season, this Vikings team was one that many saw taking a step back. They had overachieved a little last year, and that was in large part due to them winning many close games by small margins. They went 13-4, yet somehow had a negative point differential. However, this year they have not been so lucky. In week 1, they just looked out of sync offensively. They could not get the run game going at all. And in week 2 versus the Eagles, they had a ridiculous 4 fumbles, one of which was a Justin Jefferson fumble that was called a touchback, and that could have absolutely changed the game in hindsight, seeing as they only lost the game by 6 points. And this season so far just seems like the antithesis of last season. A lot of bad turnovers, basically no running game, and just a lot of bad breaks going against them. Kirk Cousins and the passing game has looked above average for the most part, especially against the Eagles. The trio of Hawkinson, Jefferson, and Jordan Addison has been great. However, with no running game and bad ball security, their offense has underachieved, and their defense is still under a transitionary period under Brian Flores with a lot of new younger pieces. As for whether they can bounce back or not, the one thing the Vikings have going forward for them is their division is still a huge question mark. The NFC North is a combined 2-6 to start the season, and with no clear favorite, they're still very much in the hunt for the division. I think the defense will get better throughout the season under Brian Flores, despite maybe not having the best personnel player-wise. My biggest concern is that the running game, however, has been abysmal, with their lead back, Madison, only averaging 3.3 yards per carry, but it all starts with that offensive line. Either way, the Vikings are looking like they are in trouble. The silver lining, though, is that their division is one of the weaker ones, which may help their playoff chances come the end of the season. Staying in the NFC North, I have the Chicago Bears next, who have started the season 0-2, losing in week 1 to the Packers in a blowout, and then losing to the Buccaneers in week 2. And this one is especially disappointing because we were supposed to really see the Bears take a decent step forward this year. We were supposed to see Justin Fields really take the next step towards becoming one of the better QBs in the league, and that simply has not happened in the slightest. And it all starts with Justin Fields. Like I stated, he has not taken that next step. He has struggled in being able to sense pressure, staying locked onto his first read a little too long, and when you combine that with the fact their offensive line has been doing him no favors, it is no surprise that this has been a disaster of a start. Justin Fields has only thrown for 427 yards and 2 touchdowns throughout the first 2 games with 3 interceptions, and he has been sacked 10 times already through just 2 games. That is not to mention that the run game has also not been great, with their lead rusher Khalil Herbert having only single-digit rushes in both weeks. That is of course not accounting for Justin Fields, and the defense has also been very worrisome as well, especially that secondary allowing the second most yards per passing attempt in the league, and the defense as a whole has just not been great, allowing Jordan Love to throw for 3 touchdowns in week 1 and Baker Mayfield to throw for over 300 yards and a touchdown in week 2. Bears fans have to be worried going forward because it is looking like Justin Fields may not be the answer at QB going forward, and there are serious questions about this O-line going forward. It is only week 2, so they will have a lot of time to figure this out, but if they continue to struggle and Justin Fields does not play well, this season can be ugly and very disappointing. We at least saw some encouraging signs in week 2. DJ Moore had over 100 receiving yards, and he's the first Bears receiver to go over 100 yards since Darnell Mooney in 2021, week 18. So if that connection becomes stronger throughout the season, maybe this offense looks a lot better going forward. Like I stated earlier with the Vikings, they are in the NFC North also, which has a lot of question marks, so they are by no means out of the division race yet, but they will need to show more encouraging signs in the next couple of games because many people are already writing them off just 2 weeks into the season. The second to last team we have here starting 0-2 is the Denver Broncos, who lost to the Las Vegas Raiders in week 1 and then the Washington Commanders in week 2. This is a Denver team who is now being led by head coach Sean Payton, with Russell Wilson back at QB for his second season. And this team is an interesting 0-2. They lost the first game against the Raiders in a game where they only had 6 offensive possessions, which ultimately led to a low-scoring game against the Raiders, which they ended up losing. In week 2, they blew a huge lead against the Washington Commanders and almost came back on a miraculous Hail Mary to no avail due to not converting the 2-point conversion. This team has finally at least shown a pulse offensively this year. They are finishing drives that they would not have last year, and surprisingly, they lead the NFL in points per possession so far through 2 weeks. Russell Wilson hasn't been the elite Russ we knew back in Seattle, but he has at least been serviceable and a lot better than last year. The real problem has been their defense. Like I stated earlier, they only had 6 possessions in week 1 due to their defense struggling to get them extra possessions, and in week 2 they allowed 35 points to a Washington Commander offense led by Sam Howell, who absolutely carved them up. This was a Denver Broncos defense that was one of the best last year. However, this year under the leadership of Vance Joseph, it has been the opposite, with the defense being one of the weaker points of this team. For the Broncos to really bounce back and win 9 to 10 games this season and have a chance at being in the playoff race, they're really going to have to play complementary football and have the defense step up to help this offense out. I am unsure if they will be able to both play well off of each other, but time will tell. But starting off the season 0-2 when you had 2 very winnable games to start the season has to be a very disappointing way to start off the Sean Payton era in Denver. And if the defense does not step up to at least match the offense, Broncos country may not be riding very far this year. And finally, the last team we have listed here, and probably the most disappointing team so far this year, the Cincinnati Bengals, who started off the season losing in week 1 to the Cleveland Browns and in week 2 to the Baltimore Ravens. And it is not so much the fact that they have lost both matches since they are division games and anything can happen in division rival games, but it is how bad their offense has looked for the majority of both games. Joe Burrow had a really rough start to the season, throwing for only 82 yards, completing under 50% of his passes, and it was a lot of the same in the first half of the week 2 game against the Baltimore Ravens. However, the Bengals offense did eventually show life, with Burrow having 2 touchdown passes to T. Higgins in the second half. But overall, this offense has struggled. Their offensive line has not been great either, and their defensive line has gotten almost no pressure. To be fair to the Bengals, this is a team that has always started off slow in the Joe Burrow era. They started off 0-2 last year and still made the playoffs. However, like I stated at the beginning of the video, that is pretty rare. For them to do that again in a super loaded AFC conference will be very difficult. The biggest concern now is that Joe Burrow has now re-aggravated his calf injury, and if he has to miss any time, this Bengals team is in huge trouble. They have dug themselves into an 0-2 hole, and they cannot afford to lose Burrow for an extended period of time. If Burrow misses even a couple games, their playoff chances become very slim. For the Bengals to bounce back, they are really going to need to hope that that Burrow calf injury is not too serious, and that this offense can really figure it out. Whether it is Joe Burrow shaking off the rust and getting the ball to his star receivers in T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, or the offensive line holding up in pass protection. Definitely the most surprising team to start off 0-2 this season, but they are not in uncharted territory, as they were able to overcome these odds last year, and if any team could probably do it again, it's the Bengals. But yeah, those are the 0-2 teams I wanted to bring up and talk about. Each of them have very interesting reasons as to why they have had a slow start to the season, and it'll be very interesting to see if these teams can bounce back from their slow starts. As always, if you enjoyed the video, hit that like and subscribe button. It helps the channel out a ton, and let me know what team you think has the best chance to bounce back in the comments below. If you're into sports like the NBA and NFL, go check out the rest of the channel as well. Once again, thank you for watching, and have a great one.